Element 79. Ever since this metal was discovered, people have been fighting over it. This rule was basically set early on: the more of this you have, the more powerful you are. And this story continues to this day. What is the biggest storage for gold around the world? Right here, the northern part of the state of Kentucky, called Fort Knox. Fort Knox is basically a military base, and it's ginormous, 440 square kilometers. It's good to know that this base was one of the earliest bases in United States history. Even before the country existed, in the Revolutionary War, the Americans had a base over here. And the reason is it's a very strategic place in the US. But let's get back to the gold we were talking about. The most amount of gold in one building is here, and most of it is underground. There's more than 8,000 tons of gold in this building. And just like we said, this is the most amount of gold that belongs to any government, with a huge margin, because in second place you have Germany that has about 3,000 tons of gold. There's not a lot of information about the vaults that are inside this building, but they say the walls of these vaults are made from granite, cement, and rebar. Even though this is a military base, but the building itself and inside it has its own security. The security that protects this area is called the US Mint Police, and they are considered a federal police. The US Mint is very small, but it has an extremely important job. It protects Fort Knox and the US Treasury, and that means there's only 374 of these officers around, but 374 well-trained officers that are made to do one job: protect these buildings. Before this, the gold of the US was kept in Philadelphia and New York. But when you get to 1935 and there is a lot of tension around the world, especially Europe, the US gets scared and decides to take the gold in the middle of the country, so it's not next to the coast where it can be easily accessible. And that is why they chose a very strategic, safe location, Fort Knox. Nobody except military personnel can enter this facility, and nobody except the US Mint Police can enter the building itself. So the photos you're seeing is taken by the US Mint Police. In the year 1935, when they decided to take all the US's gold in one location, they built this fort, which is extremely secure, and most of it is underground, in less than 2 months. And the reason is it was an emergency. Of course, everybody knew there was tension in Europe, and it was any second where a war was gonna begin, and the US wanted to play safe, and that is why they took their most valuable assets to somewhere very safe. I don't know if you guys noticed, but before World War II started, German officers would always say, "We're trying to build bombers that could go through the Atlantic Ocean." And when you say that, that means you want to reach the United States. So they were kind of threatening the US. So the US wanted to make this fort even better. To ship all this gold, they used the train. Any cargo train that would be shipped with gold, they would pretty much be sent with an army in case somebody was trying to do something smart. And they take all the gold and supplies with safety to Fort Knox. To take all this gold to Fort Knox, it was actually 10 times as expensive as building the Fort Knox building itself. It cost more than $4 million to bring it all. When World War II began, of course the US was very worried, especially for the East Coast. They were always expecting the German Air Force to drop bombs on the eastern coast. So anything important they had in the capital, especially older documents, they took it to Fort Knox, and the most important one and valuable one was the Declaration of Independence. And alongside that, they emptied out the Congress Library. After World War II, a lot of things are added to the Fort Knox vault. One of the countries was Hungary, and they asked the US government to take their valuable things in case the Soviets want to take it. So they asked the US government to keep it safe until they can get it back. The most important piece is King Stefan I's crown. He was the king of Hungary around the year 1000. Either way, the Americans hold on to this until the year 1978, where Hungary feels safe and asks for their stuff back. In the 1970s, where there was a lot of commotion in the Cold War, the Americans realized that most of the places that produce opium are being taken over by the USSR, and that is why they were worried about having opium, because it's one of the most important drugs, especially for the pharmaceutical industry. So they supplied a lot of opium and packaged it up safely to bring to Fort Knox just in case. And it was enough supplies for years if something went wrong. They kept this opium for more than 20 years, and in 1993, when the US government for sure realized that the USSR is no longer around, they gave the opium to the pharmaceutical industries so they can actually use it now. It gets interesting when the US president asked the authorities if he can visit Fort Knox. You know why it's interesting? Because they don't allow him. Even though he's the president, they're not gonna let him in. Only one president has been able to visit Fort Knox, and it was when it was being opened by FDR. In the year 1974, there was a lot of stories and of course conspiracy theories about Fort Knox, and a lot of people would say this building is fake and there is no gold in here and everybody's fooling you. And that is why the US government allowed 11 Congress members and of course alongside reporters to enter the vaults to check it out for themselves. The pictures you're seeing were the pictures that the reporters took, and these were the ones that were publicized. And of course, they would announce that this is the biggest gold vault in the world. The picture you're seeing is the opium they're keeping inside the vault. After this took place, they didn't allow any regular person to enter anymore until we get to the year 2017, when Donald Trump has become president and his Secretary of Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, is telling them we have to check inside the vault to make sure everything is square. This time, they didn't allow reporters to go back in, but Steve Mnuchin checked everything out and he said everything is in perfect order. Even though no stranger has been able to enter this facility, and nobody has, but there's a movie about it called James Bond Goldfinger, which is one of the most famous old James Bond movies that came out in 1964. In the year 2022, a regular person started walking inside the army base of Fort Knox, and they were getting closer and closer to the main building. Even though he was warned multiple times to stop moving, he wouldn't listen, and they eventually shot and killed him. So Fort Knox is probably one of the most protected vaults in the world. If you want to enter here by force, you're gonna face an army.